Captain Mark Reynolds stood alone on the observation deck, his weathered face lit by the blue glow of Earth below. His eyes, however, fixed on something else entirely: the massive alien warship being towed into the orbital dock. Even from this distance, he could see the dull patches on its hull where paint had worn away, revealing the metal beneath. "The last one," he muttered to himself. Finally, this ship completed the set of 15 vessels that humanity had purchased from the Galactic Confederation. The deal had seemed like a miracle 6 months ago, when Earth first made contact with the alien alliance. Humanity, new to the galactic stage and vulnerable, had traded nearly everything of value for these warships: rare metals, historical artifacts, and exclusive mining rights to Mars. The Confederation representatives, tall blue-skinned beings with 4 arms and silver eyes, had smiled their strange smiles throughout the negotiations. "These ships will protect your world from any threat," they had promised. Slightly used, but fully battle-ready. The observation deck door slid open with a hiss. Chief Engineer Anna Wilson walked in, her work boots leaving greasy marks on the polished floor. Her red hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes from weeks of too little sleep. "You've seen the preliminary reports?" she asked, not bothering with a greeting. Reynolds nodded. "I have." "Then you know it's the same as all the others." She handed him a tablet displaying detailed scans of the warship's internal systems. Reactor chambers eaten through with corrosion. Weapons systems gutted. Navigation computers at least 200 years out of date. Reynolds took the tablet, though he hardly needed to look at it. The story had been the same with all 15 ships. What Earth had believed was a generous offer from new galactic friends had turned out to be the equivalent of selling a rusty car with a fresh coat of paint to hide the damage. "They cheated us," Wilson said, anger making her voice shake. "They sold us their garbage and took our treasures in return." Reynolds handed the tablet back to her. "Yes, they did. The Security Council is meeting in an hour. Admiral Henderson wants you there." "I'll be there." Wilson turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Do you think they're laughing at us?" "The Confederation." Reynolds looked back at the massive ship. Even broken and gutted, it was still an impressive sight. Over a kilometer long, bristling with empty weapon ports, its alien design unlike anything humans had built before. "Probably," he answered honestly. "But that might be their first mistake." The Security Council chamber was buried deep beneath the North American continent, a relic from older, more paranoid times that had found new purpose in this age of alien contact. 12 men and women sat around a circular table, their faces grim in the harsh light. Admiral Thomas Henderson stood at the head of the table, his tall frame straight despite his 70 years, his uniform crisp and perfect. On the wall behind him, screens displayed images of all 15 purchased warships, each one hanging in orbit like a monument to humanity's naivety. "The Confederation representatives left orbit this morning," Henderson announced. "They've taken their payment and gone, leaving us with 15 ships that are little more than floating scrap." A balding man in an expensive suit pounded his fist on the table. "We should demand our resources back. This is fraud on a global scale." Henderson's expression remained calm. "With what leverage, Secretary Pierce? We have no ships that can pursue them, no weapons that could threaten them, and no legal standing in their Confederation courts. So we just accept this," a woman with steel-gray hair asked. "We let them treat Earth like some backwater planet they can swindle and forget." "No, Director Chen," Henderson said. "We do what humans have always done when backed into a corner. We adapt." He nodded toward the far end of the table. "Dr. Nakamura, please share your assessment." All eyes turned to the small woman sitting quietly at the end of the table. Dr. Lisa Nakamura didn't look up immediately, her attention fixed on the tablet in front of her. She was the head of Earth's Xenotechnology Division, responsible for understanding and reverse engineering alien technology. Her black hair was streaked with premature white, the result of working 18-hour days since the first alien ship arrived. "The ships are not worthless," she said finally, her soft voice somehow filling the room. "They're deliberately sabotage." She tapped her tablet, and the wall screens changed to show detailed schematics of the alien vessel's internal systems. "The reactors are damaged, yes, but the damage is surgical. Someone removed specific components and left others intact. The weapons weren't stripped away entirely. Their mounting hardware and power conduits remain. The navigation systems weren't out of date by accident. Their core processors were replaced with older models." Reynolds leaned forward. "You're saying they went to the trouble of making the ships look functional while ensuring they weren't?" Nakamura nodded. "Precisely, Captain. This wasn't carelessness. This was intentional." "But why?" Director Chen asked. "Why not just sell us completely stripped vessels? Why the deception?" "Because," Reynolds said slowly, understanding dawning, "they wanted us to try to use them. They wanted us to take these ships into battle believing they would protect us." Henderson's eyes narrowed. "And when they failed, Earth would be defenseless," Reynolds finished. "And the Confederation could return to save us. At a price." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Earth's first contact with galactic civilization had been a setup for conquest or colonization. Admiral Henderson finally broke the silence. "Dr. Nakamura, in your professional opinion, can these ships be repaired?" Nakamura's lips curved in a slight smile. "No, Admiral, they cannot be repaired." She paused, letting tension build before continuing. "But they can be rebuilt." She tapped her tablet again, and new schematics appeared on the wall screens, the alien designs now overlaid with human modifications and additions. "The Confederation made a critical error in their deception," she explained. "By leaving most of the ships intact and only sabotaging key systems, they've given us working examples of advanced technology that would have taken us centuries to develop on our own." She stood up, suddenly energized. "We don't need to repair their ships. We can study them, understand them, and then rebuild them our way, not as pale copies of Confederation vessels, but as something new, something human." Admiral Henderson studied the modified designs on the screen. "How long would this take?" "With global cooperation and resources, 2 years for the first ship. Less for each one after that as we refine our methods." Henderson turned to the council members. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have our path forward. The Confederation thinks they've seen what humans can do." His voice hardened with resolve. "I suggest we show them how wrong they are." As the council broke into urgent discussion about resources and timelines, Reynolds caught Dr. Nakamura's eye across the table. She gave him a small nod, and he saw in her expression something that stirred his own heart, not just anger or determination, but a fierce joy at the challenge ahead. The Confederation had sold Earth-rusted warships as a prelude to subjugation. They would learn, in time, that humans were not so easily conquered. 6 months after the Security Council meeting, Earth's orbital shipyards buzzed with activity. What had once been military observation platforms and civilian space stations were now connected by a web of construction frameworks surrounding the 15 alien vessels. Workers in spacesuits moved like ants across the massive hulls, cutting away damaged sections and installing new components. Captain Mark Reynolds floated through the central corridor of the ship codenamed Defiance, the first of the 15 to undergo full reconstruction. The interior had been stripped down to its skeleton, with only the main support beams remaining. Human design systems now filled the spaces where alien technology had once been. "Captain on deck," someone called, and the engineers working on an open panel straightened to attention. "At ease," Reynolds said. "I'm just here to see Chief Wilson." As if summoned by her name, Anna Wilson emerged from an access tunnel, her face streaked with grease. Unlike the formal atmosphere of the Security Council chamber, the reconstruction project had adopted a more practical approach. Wilson wore standard overalls with the project patch, a phoenix rising from a broken ship, sewn on the shoulder. "You're early," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "We're not ready for the test flight for another 3 hours." Reynolds smiled. "I wanted to see how things were coming along." Wilson gestured for him to follow. "Then you'll want to see the engine room. We're installing the final components now." They made their way deeper into the ship, passing teams of workers who represented every nation on Earth. The global cooperation that Henderson had called for had materialized out of necessity and determination. Earth's brightest minds had been recruited, regardless of nationality or background. The engine room was a vast chamber at the heart of the ship. The alien reactor, once gutted and useless, had been rebuilt with a hybrid of human and reverse-engineered alien technology. "It doesn't look like much," Wilson admitted as they floated at the entrance. Reynolds studied the maze of pipes and conduits. Where the alien design had favored smooth, almost organic curves, the human modifications were more angular, more industrial. "Does it work?" he asked simply. Wilson's face broke into a grin. "Better than it should. The Confederation didn't just remove parts. They installed limiters in the power systems. Once we figured that out, we realized their reactors were running at maybe 40% of their true capacity. And now, we're getting 80% efficiency, with safety margins intact." She tapped a nearby console, bringing up a holographic display of the ship's systems. "But that's not the best part. Dr. Nakamura's team cracked their weapons encryption last month." Reynolds' eyebrows rose. "I thought the weapons were physically removed." "Not removed. Locked. The firing mechanisms were still there, just secured behind Confederation security protocols. Once we bypassed those, we found that the actual weapon components were designed to be easily replaced, probably for maintenance. We fabricated our own versions based on their designs." Reynolds shook his head in amazement. "They really didn't think we could figure this out, did they?" "Their mistake," Wilson said with satisfaction. "Now you should suit up if you're joining us for the test flight." 3 hours later, Reynolds sat in the command chair on the bridge of the Defiance. The bridge crew, a mix of military personnel and civilian specialists, worked at stations that blended human interfaces with alien technology. "All systems are green," announced the young lieutenant at the operations console. "Structural integrity at 100%. Reynolds nodded. "Detach docking clamps." With a series of metallic clangs, the ship freed itself from the construction frame. "Thrusters online," reported the pilot, a former fighter jet ace named Rodriguez, moving away from the shipyard at minimum speed. The Defiance glided smoothly into open space. Earth's blue curve filled one side of the view screen, while the blackness of space stretched out before them. "Take us to the test coordinates," Reynolds ordered. 1/4 power." 1/4 power, aye," Rodriguez confirmed, his hands moving over the controls. The ship accelerated, more smoothly than Reynolds had expected. He could feel only the slightest vibration through the deck plates. "Engineering reports all systems nominal." Wilson's voice came through the comm system. "Reactor output steady at 30%. "Begin the test sequence," Reynolds said. Rodriguez nodded. "First maneuver. Standard turn, 45 degrees to port." He entered the commands, and the ship began to bank. What should have been a gentle curve suddenly became much sharper as the Defiance executed the turn at nearly twice the expected speed. Reynolds gripped the arms of his chair as inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. "What just happened?" he demanded when the ship stabilized. Rodriguez looked up, his expression showing both confusion and delight. "She responded much faster than the simulations predicted, sir. It's like she's eager." Reynolds tapped the comm button on his chair. "Wilson, what was that?" There was a pause before the chief engineer's voice came through, breathless with excitement. "Captain, you're not going to believe this. The maneuvering thrusters are outputting nearly double their rated thrust. The efficiency algorithms we wrote are working better than expected." "Explain," Reynolds ordered. "We didn't just repair their drive systems. We improved them," Wilson replied. "The Confederation's control software was deliberately capped. We removed those limiters and rewrote the code from scratch, based on first principles rather than their assumptions. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, taking in this information. "Continue the test sequence," he said finally. "Let's see what else she can do." Over the next 3 hours, the Defiance performed maneuvers that should have been impossible according to the original Confederation specifications. The ship accelerated faster, turned sharper, and operated more efficiently than anyone had dared hope. When they finally returned to the shipyard, Admiral Henderson was waiting in the docking bay, his face unreadable. "Report, Captain," he said as Reynolds stepped off the ship. "Sir, the Defiance exceeded all performance benchmarks by an average of 87%. Reynolds reported formally, then allowed himself a small smile. "She's not just fixed, sir. She's better." Henderson nodded, his stern expression finally relaxing. "Dr. Nakamura said you'd want to see this." He handed Reynolds a tablet. On the screen was a long-range sensor reading. A Confederation diplomatic vessel was approaching the solar system. "They're coming back," Henderson said. "ETA 3 weeks. Apparently, they want to check on our progress with their generous gift." Reynolds looked up at the Defiance, its once dull hull now gleaming with fresh plating. The Earth Alliance insignia proudly displayed where Confederation markings had once been. "Perfect timing," he said. "I think we're ready to show them what human ingenuity can do." Around them, workers were already applying the lessons learned from the Defiance to the next ship in line. Where there had once been 15 rusted warships, a new fleet was taking shape, a fleet built by human hands, powered by human determination. The Confederation was coming to check on their investment, expecting to find a struggling primitive species. They would find something else entirely. The Confederation diplomatic vessel Enlightened Discourse hung in Earth orbit like a gleaming silver needle. At over 2 kilometers long, it dwarfed even the largest human space stations. Its hull bore no visible weapons, but the Earth Defense Network detected powerful energy signatures beneath its smooth surface. In the orbital conference facility hastily constructed for this meeting, Ambassador Kell of the Confederation sat across from Admiral Henderson and Captain Reynolds. The aliens' 4 arms were folded in what humans had learned was a gesture of disapproval. "You have modify our generous gifts," Kell said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into flat English. "This was not part of our agreement." Henderson kept his face neutral. "The agreement stated that Earth would receive functional warships. What we received were deliberately sabotaged vessels. A misunderstanding." Kell waved one long-fingered hand dismissively. "Perhaps there were some maintenance issues we overlooked." "Maintenance issues?" Reynolds couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "The reactors were corroded, the weapons systems locked, and the navigation computers centuries out of date." Kell's silver eyes narrowed. "Nevertheless, we are concerned about the modifications you have made. Our sensors indicate you have significantly altered the power output of these vessels. Such changes could be dangerous for a species new to interstellar technology." "We appreciate your concern," Henderson said, his tone making it clear he believed nothing of the sort. "But Earth is quite capable of." The meeting was interrupted as a young lieutenant burst into the room. "Sir, multiple unknown vessels have appeared at the edge of the solar system." Henderson was on his feet instantly. "How many?" 27, sir. They're not responding to hails, and they don't match any Confederation design in our database." Ambassador Kell had gone perfectly still, his blue skin paling to a sickly gray. "The others," he whispered, a sound of genuine fear that the translator couldn't disguise. "They have found you." On the bridge of the Defiance, now officially designated as Earth Fleet's flagship, Reynolds studied the tactical display. The unknown vessels had entered the solar system and were advancing steadily toward Earth. Their ships were unlike anything in the Confederation records, organic-looking constructs that seemed to pulse with internal energy. "What do we know about them?" Reynolds asked Dr. Nakamura, who had joined the bridge crew for this crisis. "Very little," she admitted. Ambassador Kell provided some basic information, but he seems genuinely terrified. They call themselves the Void Collective, a species or possibly a group of species from beyond Confederation space. Hostile. Extremely. According to Kell, they've destroyed dozens of Confederation outposts over the last century. No negotiations, no prisoners. Reynolds nodded grimly. And now they've found Earth. The comm system activated. This is Ambassador Kell. The alien's voice was strained. Captain Reynolds, I am departing immediately for Confederation space to request emergency assistance. I strongly advise you to evacuate your leadership to your underground facilities. Reynolds exchanged a look with Nakamura, the nearest Confederation battle fleet. 3 weeks away at their fastest speed, she answered. Reynolds tapped the comm button. Ambassador, we appreciate the offer, but Earth will stand its ground. There was a pause. With what? Kell asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Those rust buckets we sold you. Even fully functional Confederation vessels would struggle against the others. Reynolds allowed himself a small smile. Those rust buckets you sold us. We've made some adjustments. He cut the communication and turned to his bridge crew. Battle stations. Alert the rest of the Phoenix fleet to form up around Earth. Across the solar system, 15 ships, once broken and abandoned, moved into defensive positions. Each had been rebuilt, reimagined by human engineers and scientists who had taken alien technology and made it their own. The battle began 3 hours later as the Void Collective entered weapons range. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, spreading out to surround Earth. They're not even bothering to communicate, muttered Lieutenant Rodriguez from the helm. They didn't come to talk, Reynolds replied. All ships engage according to Plan Delta. The Phoenix fleet split into 3 battle groups, executing a maneuver that confused even the perfectly coordinated collective. The Earth ships moved faster and responded more quickly than the collective had anticipated, based on their knowledge of Confederation vessels. The first shots came from the collective, beams of green energy that sliced through space toward the Defiance. Reynolds braced for impact, but the ship's newly designed shields, a hybrid of Confederation technology and Earth innovations, held. Shields at 80%, reported the tactical officer. Minimal damage to outer hull plating. Return fire, Reynolds ordered. All weapons. The Defiance unleashed its arsenal, where Confederation ships fired precise, carefully controlled energy beams. The rebuilt Earth vessel fired a chaotic mixture of adapted alien weapons and human-designed missiles. The unpredictable pattern caught the nearest collective ship off guard. Its shields flared and failed under the assault. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out as Earth's fleet engaged the invaders. The Confederation diplomatic vessel hovered at the edge of the battle, its sensors recording everything. Inside the Defiance, Wilson's voice came over the intercom from engineering. Captain, we're learning their patterns. Their ships communicate on quantum frequencies similar to the locked systems we found in our ships. Reynolds glanced at Nakamura, who was already working at a science station. Can we disrupt it? Better, she replied, her fingers flying over the controls. We can insert our own commands. For 3 days, the battle raged throughout the solar system. Earth lost 2 ships to the superior numbers of the collective, but the human vessels fought with a creativity and adaptability that their enemies couldn't match. When the Defiance took a direct hit that should have vaporized it, the ship's hull, redesigned based on studies of the original Confederation materials, absorbed much of the energy and redirected it back into the weapons systems. On the 3rd day, something unprecedented happened. The 7 remaining collective ships, after losing 20 of their number, broke formation and retreated beyond the solar system. On the bridge of the Defiance, battered but still functional, the crew stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. They're running away, Rodriguez finally asked. Confirmed, said the tactical officer. They've entered faster than light speed. They're gone. As the reality of victory sank in, cheers erupted across the ship. Reynolds allowed himself to lean back in his command chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him after 3 days of continuous battle. The comm system activated, and Ambassador Kell's face appeared on the main screen. The alien looked shell-shocked, his silver eyes wide. "How?" he asked simply. "How did you survive? The others have never retreated before." "Not once in recorded history." Reynolds met the alien's gaze steadily. "Those ships you sold us," he said, "the ones you deliberately sabotaged before selling them to us." "Yes." Reynolds smiled tiredly. "We noticed." On the screen, Ambassador Kell lowered all 4 of his arms in what humans now recognized as a gesture of profound respect. 2 weeks after the battle, Captain Reynolds stepped off his shuttle onto the polished floor of the Confederation Council Station. The massive space structure orbited a neutral star at the center of Confederation territory. Its central chamber could hold thousands of representatives from hundreds of species. Today, it held just one human delegation. Reynolds, Admiral Henderson, Dr. Nakamura, and Chief Engineer Wilson walked together, surrounded by a Confederation honor guard. The alien's ceremonial armor gleamed under the soft blue lights of the corridor. Reynolds noted that, unlike Ambassador Kell, these warriors carried themselves with a rigid formality that couldn't hide their unease at escorting humans. "They're afraid of us," Wilson whispered, noticing the same thing. "No," Henderson corrected quietly. "They're curious. There's a difference." The doors to the council chamber slid open, revealing a vast amphitheater filled with alien delegates. Species of all descriptions filled the tiered seating, some with multiple limbs, others with none, some breathing air, others immersed in special tanks of liquid. Despite their differences, all fell silent as the humans entered. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, where the Confederation High Chancellor waited. The tall, crystalline being's body refracted light in hypnotic patterns. "Representatives of Earth," the Chancellor's voice was translated directly into their minds. "You have been invited to address the emergency session of the Confederation Council." Henderson stepped forward. "High Chancellor, Council members, we thank you for this invitation." The Chancellor's crystalline form pulsed with light. "Your fleet survived direct engagement with the others. No other species has managed this feat. The Council wishes to understand how this was possible." Henderson gestured to his team. "With your permission, my associates will explain." Dr. Nakamura approached the center of the platform, activating a holographic display. Images of the battle appeared, showing Earth ships performing maneuvers that made many council members murmur in surprise. "Using the vessels sold to us by the Confederation," she began, "we were able to develop hybrid systems that combined our approach to warfare with your technology." "Impossible," called out a reptilian delegate from the front row. Those ships were non-functional. A tense silence fell over the chamber. Reynolds stepped forward. "Before we continue this discussion," he said calmly, "I think we should address why the Confederation sold us defective warships in the first place." The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated voices. The Chancellor raised 4 glowing appendages, and silence returned. "Captain Reynolds," the mental voice had a new edge to it, "this is not the topic of discussion." "With respect," Henderson interrupted, "it is exactly the topic. Earth wishes to understand the Confederation's true intentions before we proceed with any alliance discussions." The Chancellor's crystalline body dimmed slightly. After a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the alien spoke. "The truth may not be what you wish to hear." "We'll take that chance," Reynolds said. The Chancellor's form pulsed once more. "For 5,000 years, the Confederation has followed the same protocol with emerging species. We provide them with gifts of technology, specifically disabled warships. Those who accept the gifts and do nothing with the broken vessels become client states, providing resources and labor. And those who try to use the broken ships?" Wilson asked, though she already suspected the answer. "They typically attempt military action once they discover the deception," the Chancellor replied. "Their primitive attempts to repair advanced technology usually result in catastrophic failures. The Confederation then offers protection in exchange for complete submission. A test, Nakamura said quietly. You were testing us. Yes, the Chancellor acknowledged. But none have done what you did. None have improved upon our technology. None have defeated the others. The admission hung in the air. Reynolds looked around the chamber, seeing the mixture of discomfort and newfound respect on alien faces. And now, Henderson asked, what does the Confederation want from Earth now? Alliance, the Chancellor stated simply. True alliance. The others have been destroying our outlying worlds for centuries. Our conventional tactics have failed to stop them. Reynolds glanced at Dr. Nakamura, who had been studying her datapad throughout this exchange. She looked up and gave him a small nod. Before we discuss alliance terms, Reynolds said, Dr. Nakamura has something to share. Nakamura stepped forward again, changing the holographic display to show a detailed analysis of the Void Collective's attack patterns. Your defensive strategy against the others is fundamentally flawed, she said, her voice calm but firm. You've been fighting them the wrong way for centuries. The council chamber erupted again, but this time the Chancellor didn't silence the outrage. Instead, the crystalline being leaned forward, examining Nakamura's data with intense interest. Explain, the Chancellor demanded when the noise finally subsided. The others aren't a traditional military force, Nakamura explained. They're a hive mind. Every ship acts as part of a single organism. Your standardized fleet responses are predictable to them because they can process the entire battlefield as one entity. She highlighted specific battle moments from Earth's defense. We defeated them because we were unpredictable. Each of our ships had different modifications, different weapons configurations, different tactical approaches. We didn't follow standard patterns because we didn't know them. Wilson stepped forward. We also discovered that their quantum communication system has vulnerabilities. We were able to disrupt their coordination by inserting conflicting commands. The Chancellor was silent for a long moment. Throughout the chamber, council members conferred in hushed tones. If what you say is true, the Chancellor finally said, it would explain much about our previous failures. Admiral Henderson nodded. Earth is willing to join the fight against the Void Collective, but we have conditions. Name them, the Chancellor replied. Full technological exchange, Henderson began, equal representation in the Confederation, and human leadership of the joint fleet operations against the others. The demands were bold, perhaps too bold. Reynolds watched as council members reacted with shock, outrage, and in some cases, thoughtful consideration. The Chancellor's crystalline form pulsed with rapidly changing colors. These terms are unprecedented. So is defeating the others, Reynolds pointed out. After what seemed like an eternity, the Chancellor's form stabilized to a steady blue glow. The Confederation accepts these terms, with modifications to be negotiated. The mental voice carried a note of what might have been respect. Humanity has earned its place among the stars, not as subjects, but as equals. As formal applause rippled through the alien delegates, Reynolds exchanged glances with his team. What had begun with deception and rust had led to humanity's acceptance on the galactic stage. The real work was just beginning. 1 year after the Confederation Council meeting, a massive fleet gathered at the edge of known space. At its heart were Earth's original 15 ships, now commanding vessels from a dozen Confederation species. The Defiance led the formation, its once rusted hull now gleaming with new armor plating that incorporated both human and alien technologies. On the bridge, Fleet Admiral Reynolds, his promotion still feeling strange after years as a captain, studied the tactical display. Nearly 300 ships moved in seemingly chaotic patterns that actually followed a complex algorithm developed by Dr. Nakamura's team. No two ships followed the same course, making it impossible for the Void Collective to predict their movements. Fleet Status Report, Reynolds ordered. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, now his executive officer, looked up from his console. All ships report ready, Admiral. Confederation vessels have implemented our tactical modifications. The randomized communication protocols are active. Reynolds nodded. After months of preparation, the joint fleet was finally ready to take the fight to the Void Collective's home territory. Long-range scouts had located their central nexus, a massive structure that served as both headquarters and hive center. Dr. Nakamura entered the bridge, her uniform now bearing the insignia of Science Director for the Joint Fleet. "Final simulations are complete," she reported. "The Collective's defenses are strong, but their patterns remain predictable." "And our surprise?" Reynolds asked. "Ready," Nakamura confirmed. "Chief Wilson completed the final calibrations this morning." Reynolds turned to address the bridge crew. "We all know what's at stake. The Void Collective has destroyed dozens of worlds. They've shown no interest in communication or peace. Until now, they've never known defeat." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We changed that at Earth. Today, we change it permanently. All ships, prepare for jump to light speed on my mark." The massive fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel, emerging hours later in the heart of Void Collective territory. What greeted them was a sight none had expected. "My God," Rodriguez whispered. Before them hung not just a central command station, but an entire artificial world. The Void Collective's nexus was a planet-sized structure of dark, organic-looking material that pulsed with green energy. Around it swarmed thousands of ships, all moving with the perfect coordination of a single mind. "There are more than we anticipated," Nakamura said, her voice steadied despite the overwhelming odds. The comm system activated, and Ambassador Kell's face appeared on screen. The alien, now serving as liaison between Earth and Confederation forces, looked grave. "Admiral Reynolds, the Confederation captains are requesting permission to retreat. They say this is suicide." Reynolds studied the massive enemy force. "Permission denied. All ships will hold formation and proceed according to plan." He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. "Launch disruptor probes. Begin Operation Babel." Across the fleet, small, unmanned vessels shot forward toward the collective swarm. Each carried a device that Earth scientists had developed based on their analysis of collective communication systems. As the probes reached their targets, they activated, sending conflicting signals throughout the hive mind. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The perfectly coordinated collective ships began to move erratically, some colliding with others as contradictory commands flowed through their network. "It's working," Nakamura reported, monitoring the data streams. "Their coordination is breaking down." "All ships engage," Reynolds ordered. "Weapons free." The battle that followed would later be described in Confederation historical records as the most chaotic and unpredictable military engagement in galactic history. The human-led fleet refused to follow conventional tactics, constantly changing formation and attack patterns. The collective, its hive mind confused by the disruptor probes and unable to predict the erratic human strategies, fought back with overwhelming numbers but diminishing effectiveness. 3 hours into the battle, the Defiance led a small strike team of Earth's original ships through a gap in the collective defenses, heading directly for the central nexus. Hull integrity at 60%, Rodriguez reported as another enemy blast rocked the ship. "Shields failing. Reroute power from non-essential systems," Reynolds ordered. "We need to get closer." As they approached the massive structure, Chief Engineer Wilson's voice came over the comm. "Admiral, we're within range. The boarding shuttles are ready." Reynolds nodded. "Launch when ready. I'll lead the ground team myself." Despite protests from his officers, Reynolds joined the boarding party. 20 minutes later, they cut through the outer skin of the Nexus, entering a bizarre landscape of organic technology. The interior resembled veins and arteries more than corridors, pulsing with the same green energy that powered the collective ships. "Stay alert," Reynolds warned his team, a mix of human special forces and Confederation warriors. "We don't know what to expect in here." They fought their way deeper into the structure, encountering strange, drone-like beings that seemed more machine than biological. Dr. Nakamura, who had insisted on joining the mission, scanned everything they passed. "These aren't individuals," she explained as they moved forward. They're extensions of the central consciousness, like cells in a body. After what seemed like hours of fighting through the organic labyrinth, they reached what Nakamura's instruments identified as the core, a massive chamber filled with a glowing green substance that flowed like liquid but sparkled like a million tiny stars. The neural network, Nakamura breathed in awe. The entire collective is controlled from here. Reynolds raised his weapon. Then this is where we end it. Wait, Nakamura said suddenly, studying her scanner. This isn't just a control center. It's communicating, trying to understand us. Reynolds hesitated. The original plan had been to destroy the core, severing the connection between all collective units. But Nakamura's discovery suggested another possibility. Can we communicate back? He asked. Nakamura nodded slowly. I think so. The disruptor technology we used, if reversed, it might create a bridge. For the next hour, while the battle raged outside, Nakamura and her team worked to establish communication with the core consciousness of the Void Collective. What they discovered changed everything. The collective was not inherently hostile. It was ancient, lonely, and afraid. A species that had evolved to share a single consciousness. It attacked because it understood only assimilation, not cooperation. It had never encountered beings who could resist its influence, let alone force it to retreat. When Reynolds finally returned to the Defiance, he carried not news of the collective's destruction, but of something unprecedented. A ceasefire agreement with an entity that had never before known the concept of peace. 3 months later, representatives from both the Confederation and the Void Collective gathered on Earth. The location was symbolic, the planet that had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Ambassador Kell approached Reynolds as they watched collective representatives experience individual existence for the first time, temporarily disconnected from their hive mind. You could have destroyed them, Kell said. Why didn't you? Reynolds watched as Dr. Nakamura demonstrated to the Void delegates how their neural technology could be modified for peaceful purposes. Because that's not who we are, he replied. You sold us rusted warships thinking we were simple primitives who would either fail or become your servants. The others attacked us thinking we were just another Confederation species to be consumed. He gestured to where Confederation representatives and Void delegates were engaged in their first productive dialogue in history. Both of you underestimated us. Both of you now recognize something you've never had to face before. Reynolds smiled slightly. Human creativity. As the peace treaty was signed, representatives from both ancient powers adopted the formal postures of their respective diplomatic protocols. The Confederation representatives with all 4 arms lowered, the Void delegates with their temporary bodies bowed forward. To human eyes, it looked very much like kneeling. Reynolds stood tall among them, representing the species that had turned rusted warships into the instruments of a new galactic order.